Futurized goes beneath the trends to track the underlying forces of disruption in tech, policy, business models, social dynamics, and the environment. I'm your host, Trond Arne Undheim, futurist and author. In episode 2 of the podcast, the topic is the future of beverages. Our guest is Ronan McGovern, MIT alum with a PhD in mechanical engineering and currently the CEO at Sandymount Technologies and Point5 Brewing, an MIT spin-out he founded that serves brewers. So here I am with Ronan McGovern, who is an MIT alum and an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur at that. And we are here to talk about food tech, specifically on the future of beverages. Ronan, how are you today?
Doing well. I just wish it would stop raining here, Trond.
Look, I was going to get to this, but aren't you from Dublin?
Yeah, right. That's like, I thought I'd get some benefit from moving away, but it doesn't seem that way this week.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm Norwegian myself. I have the same issue. I love good weather, but I can't culturally claim that I always have. Tell me, so you have a PhD in mechanical engineering from MIT. So at some point you got yourself over here. How did that happen?
Yeah, I actually got a Fulbright scholarship. There was this program which has since been discontinued to support full PhDs via the Fulbright program. So Fulbright is normally an exchange program that only lasts 6 months or a year, and it's bilateral. So either US people can go to other countries, or other countries like Ireland, Pakistan, Nepal, anywhere can come here. So anyway, there was this PhD program that was supported. I got a fellowship, and that made it pretty attractive for any university to accept me because Fulbright was funding a lot. And so I ended up applying to a few universities, and one of them that I got into was MIT. So that's how I got here.
Yeah, not at all to do with you being an exciting guy, which we'll get into. So that's suitably modest. I like that over European.
I think it was the Irish accent.
Probably. You know, let's just jump straight into the beverage space. It's an area that you are passionate about. Everybody loves the space, and uses beverages for all kinds of things, and more and more different flavors and everything. What's going on in this space, Ronan? I don't fully understand that.
Well, neither do I, Trond. I'm learning every day, but I suppose I can say a few things. One is people are obviously drinking a lot less sugar. And I'd say to some degree, people are drinking less alcohol as well.
Right.
So whereas if you look at the total amount of liquid that people drink on a daily basis, a lot of that, say 20 years ago, especially in the US, would have been soda. And that's really changed now. So there's this whole chunk of the market. And in fact, juice consumption has gone down as well, which is another kind of high sugar drink. And so that's all been replaced by, this new phase of beverages, which a lot of it is, maybe coffee, cold brew, sparkling water, seltzer, is something people are drinking a lot of, and hopefully non-alcoholic beer, Trond. That's my hope.
Of course, we'll get to that in a second. You're the CEO and founder of a technology company that serves brewers with all kinds of technology that has a very interesting feature that it's a very interesting company you've got. But let's stop just for a second on this idea of this beverage sector first, because there are lots of claims in the industry that health and wellness concerns are now becoming more important, which I guess isn't a surprise. But also there's this, what the industry is more incremental innovators, I would say, call line extensions. Can you comment on these things before we get into the kind of the meat of like the more revolutionary changes? What are these line extensions, and why is the industry consistently putting out new flavors, and why is that even working?
Oh, I don't know if it's working. I'll again just give you a few of my comments, but I suppose if you're changing flavors, it's hard from a business standpoint because you keep on having to create new packaging and new advertising. And it's kind of hard to make money if you keep on having to change what you're doing, because you don't get to keep stamping it out and reduce the cost and eventually make a profit. So I think that's been a challenge actually for the industry. But to some extent, it's what consumers maybe want. People would say it's kind of the era of choice. People want more options. I don't necessarily agree with that myself, but I think people would say that. A little anecdote. I suppose maybe I've heard this from craft brewers. So if you look at a craft brewer, a lot of craft brewers will sell most of their volume on a single SKU or a single type of product. So, for example, Harpoon Brewery here in Boston, pretty much, a very big chunk of their sale would be their Harpoon IPA. Okay, you've probably had a Harpoon IPA, Trond, have you?
I have, yes.
Nice. I like it. It's a very good one. So they'll make, most of their money and most of their sales on that. And that's not dissimilar to other craft brewers. And so the other kind of brands that keep coming out that you're talking about, to some extent, that's a marketing budget, because you're trying to keep engagement with the audience. And so that's what I've heard a few craft brewers say about those, line extensions, as you've called them, Trond.
Right. Well, we're going to get to what you're doing in a moment, but I just wanted to build it up a little bit. And there are just so many perplexing things for me in this industry. I mean, for instance, this whole term functional plus drinks. Have you heard this?
It rings a bell. Yeah. Yeah.
That I don't even understand. But I mean, I guess from your perspective, the function of a drink is the liquid. I mean, is that pretty much what it is? The function of a drink is its liquid. So the function plus is flavor. I'm just trying to get the terminology right before we really, I can even understand, what's going on in the industry.
Yeah, I'd say I'm weak on terminology, Trond, but it's an interesting question. What is a beverage? I mean, maybe just to go to a big example like Coca-Cola, one of the most successful beverages ever. I mean, there you have a product that, I suppose provides hydration. It provides energy, calories. It also has caffeine in it, so it's kind of waking you up, which also is, somewhat addictive, I guess. Maybe good from a product standpoint if you're cynical about it. And then it kind of has a brand, so it makes you feel like maybe the people who are in the Coca-Cola advertisements. So I guess there's a lot to unpack when you talk about a beverage.
Well, exactly. I think that's the issue, right? And I probably was trying to oversimplify it, because there clearly is something here. I mean, I discovered this the first time, not just about beverages, but the entire food space, of course, and food tech. I remember us putting on two, I think, different food tech events at MIT a few years back, and they were just immensely oversubscribed. There's something, why are people so intrigued when it comes to innovations or new takes on this space? Because you surely must have experienced some of this kind of effervescence around your company as well. People get very fascinated when they see what you've actually done.
Well, is it maybe just that people can actually try it themselves partly? So it's a product that's, very close to the consumer and their daily lives, I guess. Maybe it's that, is it?
I mean, I don't know. I definitely think it's an exciting space. I just think that it is very hard to track it and really understand what the consumer shifts are all about. Because, in the marketing lingo, you try to understand kind of generational demands, new things sort of coming in. But some of these changes, right, they can cause pretty profound, product portfolio changes in the industry. So let's then go to your function in this market. So the whole idea of a non-alcoholic beverage, when did this space emerge? Do you know?
To some extent, it's been around a long time, Trond. If you look at, say, the German market, that's a market where there's, I won't say always, but certainly always for the length of my life, which goes back to 1989, there would have been non-alcoholic beer, and it would have been consumed, in a single-digit percentage of the market, which is pretty significant. So I don't have the number, but it could be around 5, maybe even a little bit higher percent of the German market the beer market.
That's a high amount.
It's
because
high,
I mean, in the US, I guess the Prohibition era was the first time when was even an incentive to try to produce something. But I to my knowledge, there wasn't really a very high success for any non-alcoholic products at that time. Maybe else, Anheuser-Busch in the 1990s came out with something. I think they had bought this brewer, O'Dowell's.
O'Doul's, yeah.
O'Doul's, yeah. Sorry, O'Doul. The taste will win you over.
You're right.
I don't know how popular that thing was, but that's a while back.
It is.
And then fast forward to now, you're seeing big things happening with non-alcoholic beer. You think it's becoming a true force, right?
Well, I think what surprised me a lot, Trond, was to learn that in Ireland and see myself, because I spend quite a bit of time there, that non-alcoholic took off. I mean, you kind of just have to laugh at that when you think of Irish people drinking non-alcoholic beer. But the fact is that now I think it's also in the single-digit percentages of the beer market in Ireland. People are drinking, products like Heineken and Carlsberg 0.0. And
so that's interesting, because I think that's a little bit ahead of the US, because I don't know, in the US it used to be the market for non-alcoholic drinks were sort of retired cops, suburban dads, and obviously reformed alcoholics and others who had very good reason to do so. But now, arguably, it's different. I was looking this up, and according to Nielsen, and I think this was beginning of this year, 0.5% of category dollars in January, went into the category, but however, that makes the market worth about $7 billion. Is that enough to be excited about, or is it more the trends and what you're seeing from Europe and other places that makes you excited, for instance, about the US market of this kind?
Yeah, I mean, all it takes for me to get excited is if I see there's single-digit growth, or single-digit of the beer market is non-alcoholic in a place like Ireland. It seems very reasonable to me that the US is certainly in big cities, coastal cities. I think that the percentage will rise to at least that amount. And that, if you think about that, which is, by the way, you're right, that's not where the US market is yet, but I think it's on that trajectory. I think that makes it a pretty big market then.
Have you been to any bars that only sell non-alcoholic beer? I know that there's a bar in Brooklyn, Getaway, that opened in April that offers mocktails only. And there seems to be a pop-up venue in Manhattan that is advertising that they're rewriting nightlife beyond alcohol. But, it seems to me that it is still relatively fringe, but it is, if it is like you're saying, it's growing. And let's get to that in a second. You tell me a little bit more about what your company does, in this space, what the innovation is. And I think you and I have had a discussion about this. You also think that the taste of both non-alcoholic beer and the beer that you, and you can explain your technology yourself, but you take the water out of beer. I'm just very fascinated by the whole concept. Tell me how do you make that happen?
Yeah, so Point5 is the brand that I've started, Point5 Brewing. And Point5 is about creating a non-alcoholic beer that tastes just like beer. And the way that's done is using a membrane or filtration technology that's able to very precisely remove the alcohol from a traditionally fermented beer. So we're really going a traditional route. Like, we're making Point5 beer exactly like beer is traditionally made. It's actually brewed as a Pilsner. The difference is just in the step after the fermentation, we selectively remove that alcohol using, this pretty special technology that we've developed. And what that lets us do is get that very close match to that original beer. So that's kind of what it's all about. And, a lot of non-alcoholic beers, the alternate way of making it is to kind of radically change the beer by, say, evaporating the water, which evaporates a lot of the flavor, or to completely change the fermentation process. So you just stop fermentation early and don't make the alcohol. But really, in those two cases, it's quite hard to get back or to match the original taste. And I think that's where, Point5 stands out.
So you are unique with this approach?
We are, Trond, yes.
How did you get started on this? And what was the path from, I'm assuming, some of your doctoral work that led into this? Can you tell me what you did, on the technology side that convinced you that you had a membrane that could do this job?
Yeah, sure. So Point5, Trond, is a more recent venture. It's something that just has been started within the last 6 months. And it came off the platform of Sandy Mount Technologies, which is a membrane technology company I started. So let me pull you right back to when I left MIT and started Sandymount, which is now almost 5-6 years ago. As you said, I was working on desalination at MIT. I was working on membranes, which is the same category of technology that we use today at Sandymount and at Point5. And long story short, I found an application where I could use filtration technology to make beer concentrates, thereby saving money on transport for brewers. And that's been the core business at Sandymount, and I can tell you a bit more about that. But in essence, along the way, while working with membranes, the team at Sandymount discovered a way to remove alcohol, and that kind of led to the birth of Point5.
It's fascinating because you're basically removing what I would have thought were essential elements. I mean, in Sandymount, I remember showing off your company, I guess, to industry a few years back, right? And I don't know, they didn't really believe it, right? You could remove the water and have the same taste after when you put the water back in. That's also striking. But now you're also removing the alcohol. It sort of begs the question: what were you drinking before?
Yeah. So I mean, I'll get sciencey a little bit here for a second, Trond. If you look at beer, there's water, which is the smallest molecule inside beer. The next biggest one is alcohol. And then the next biggest ones are basically the aromas. And then if you go above the aromas, you get to proteins and sugars. But the key is the smallest is water, the second smallest is alcohol. So if you have a filter or a sieve of a certain size that's just bigger than water, which is what we do at Sandymount, you can just let the water through. And then if you have a sieve that's slightly bigger again, that's just bigger than alcohol, you can let the alcohol and the water through, and you can keep the aromas. And I guess, science and engineering is at a point now where we can do that very selectively. And that's why, the quality is so good.
Let's get to this in a second, but I'm fascinated by membrane technology because the precision level that you talk about now just makes so many opportunities. Do you have ideas for even further use cases of this kind of membrane? I mean, what are some of the other use cases that the technology you developed could conceivably be used for? Have you tried to filtrate other things?
Yeah, so the category where the Sandymount technology does well is with very small molecules that have no charge, like alcohol or like the aromas I'm talking about in beer. Those molecules, unlike, say, salt that's in seawater, they're not ionic or they're not charged, which actually makes it harder to select them because you can't use charge as a way to select between the compounds. So our technology is very good at those small uncharged molecules. So the beverage sector is a very good area. Alcoholic beverages in particular, because they have a lot of these small subtle flavors that come from fermentation. Cold brew coffee, there's some of the aromatics in that. There are other applications, for example, distilling alcohol without using heat for the purpose of making biofuels. There's also a project that I'm working on around wastewater treatment where there's some, alcohol in that, like isopropyl alcohol used for chemical processing, So yeah, there's a few for you, Trond.
Fantastic. So did you have a specific interest in the beverage space? I mean, we were joking about, liking beer earlier, but the aromatics space and the whole idea of, advanced sensing and being able to capture and or protect kind of these aromatics that are so important to us as human beings. I mean, it's sort of the small things that count, right, in life. So, having a beverage that tastes, has a unique taste or that you just love. I mean, you can get very excited about that. I know I have my own favorite drinks.
Okay.
How did you get into this?
Well, in my own time, I'm interested kind of in. So I've been fermenting some mead, and I had been doing that before Sandymount. Honey wine, basically fermenting that at home, and kind of like you said, I wanted to make something that would be unique that maybe everybody wouldn't have at a house party. So people might be home brewing beer, so I thought, well, I'll do mead. I think I did one with maple syrup once again to just push the envelope out a bit more. So I've kind of had that interest in, messing around, and I would have done projects like that with my dad, not with meat or alcohol, but, other engineering projects when I was a kid. So that was maybe a subliminal kind of direction, motivator. I guess though, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's where I wanted to go because, you are a bit of a serial entrepreneur or serial tinkerer, aren't you? You're interested in what might happen if you do this and that and tinker here. And, tell me about how, I mean, you were like that. You said growing up, you were inspired from even from your dad to do these kinds of experiments.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say I was a crazy scientist, and I was, doing projects all day, every day. Like I used to do a good bit of sports and music and stuff as well. But, building kites or flying little airplanes and, stuff like that, building little things in the garden. So I wouldn't say I have a lot of curiosity. I put it that way, Trond. I wouldn't say necessarily I have, really deep technical talent like some of the people I've met at MIT that are just insanely good at coding or at, doing Arduino circuits. But I have the curiosity to try things out, I guess.
Well, tell me, you did something recently that related to COVID, another massive event that is unfolding right now. You started, well, how did this start? Why don't you unfold it for me? Because I know what I was doing in January, February, and I was, I started writing about it. You decided to build a business.
Yeah. So the background, I suppose, is that we were getting into the COVID period around early to mid-March, and at Sandymount, which, as I mentioned, the membrane technology business, we mostly serve large brewers, by the way, with that business. But because of COVID, pretty much all our projects were put on pause. So I was in a situation where like money was not going to flow in from revenue from those projects. Plus, and I don't know if this is a greater or a lesser fear than running out of money, but having people bored on your team is very undesirable when you're running a company. And so when projects dry up, you kind of worry about, well, what am I going to have these people do? And I was just reading a newspaper and I saw about how some distilleries in Europe, because, Europe had gotten ahead of COVID before the US, I guess. So they were turning distilleries into making hand sanitizer, and kind of said to myself, well, we might have a few industry connections here. Maybe there's a way to just make some hand sanitizer. And actually, Trond, I don't know where you shop. Where do you shop? I shop at Trader Joe's sometimes. But I was down at Trader Joe's and I saw there was like no hand sanitizer on the shelves. And I saw that in a few other places. And I was calling around to like Walgreens and Walmart, and basically nowhere had got hand sanitizer on the shelves at all. And that was the point where I kind of put out a blast on social media and said to people, hey folks, anyone want to help me try and make some hand sanitizer? Right.
And that went pretty well. You basically put a business up within 2 weeks. How is that possible? Well, I mean, what does that take?
I think it takes very good connections, and I was lucky that people volunteered. So we got a kind of core team. There was Dana Hemmert and Adam Weiner, who were at Sandymount, also Anton Hunt and Gina Zach, and then two cousins of mine, John and Barry McGovern. But between all of us, we kind of managed to patchwork together what we needed. So Anton found a distributor that fronted us some money that, allowed us to buy all the raw materials and ingredients. Gina found us a place where we could do the bottling. I actually don't even remember where we got the bottles from. Oh, I think that was via the bottler themselves. And then Barry, my cousin, by calling around, we found some sources for ethanol. But it was a crazy market, and pretty much every day there'd be deals that would be dropping. You'd say, "Oh, I'll put in an order for that ethanol," and then you call back again in an hour, and it'd all be gone. So wow. It was kind of chaos, and people are only doing business based on cash, so you can't get any credit in this kind of environment. So everything has to be paid up front by wire. So there was just money being wired everywhere.
this was way before the recipe started appearing really online. I think even WebMD has a recipe right now. And, from what I understand, and also from what you're telling me, right, it's a mix of water, ethanol, glycerin, hydrogen peroxide, and in some measure.
Yeah.
But then you also needed the boxes, the labels, the bottles, the manufacturing site, the bottling site, and then you needed the buyers. This is not super easy. You're making it sound extremely easy.
No, it's a nightmare because as you need all of those things. And there were many points where we had everything except for one thing, and then something else would fall apart. So there was one point where we literally had the alcohol, the bottles, the producer, and we didn't have somebody to buy it and front the money. Then we got somebody to buy it and we didn't have a license to receive the alcohol. Then at some other point, we had everything, but the supply of the alcohol dropped. So it was very fragile. Not how I'd recommend running a business.
I believe you're describing a startup though, right? I mean, this is in essence, you had this very concentrated startup experience, but in the end, you ended up selling 1.5 million bottles of hand sanitizer. Who does that?
Well, I guess somebody smaller than Purell, but bigger than maybe a local distillery. So we were kind of filling that gap between, the largest companies that had very big lead times to do things. But yeah, we were kind of big enough to provide more supply than just, a local distillery could do. So
when did you discover that this was a pop-up business and it wasn't going to last? Because I understand you're now trying to sell off the assets you told me. Why is that, and how quickly did that implode, and how did that even happen? Because it's a scary prospect. You put together all of these things, and had you not been able to sell all those bottles, I mean, all that investment, where would it have gone?
Well, we ended up pre-selling all the bottles. So we got paid in advance by the person buying them. So we already had clarity on where they would go. So right now, we only have random things like a few totes, or there's maybe some excess, certain chemicals, which I think we sold off. But, the day I started it, Trond, was the day I knew it would shut down pretty quickly. I just never thought it would last for 2.5 months. And I think, Anton, who was kind of my co-lead on it, he would have said the same. We were thinking, we might be lucky and get 2 weeks out of this.
And what were the motivations apart from keeping your great staff busy? Did you want to help? Was it purely thinking, wow, this could be some really fast money here? What are some of the things going into it? I guess I'm just curious. I mean, you started a company in a month and have wound it up in 2 months. What are you left with, I guess, is what I'm saying. So when you think back on this experience, I mean, 1, was it worth it? 2, did you achieve what you set out to do?
Yeah, so I think what I wanted to do was pretty simple. I wanted to try and cover payroll for people that were at my business, and I wanted to keep them busy. So, I mean, that's quite a lot of motivation. I don't think I needed anything more than that. I think probably one of the most interesting things about the sanitizer experience was it was very interesting to learn about kind of doing a non-profit company versus doing a for-profit versus doing something in between. And what we ended up with Shop Respond was something that was in between. So it's actually an LLC, so it's a for-profit company. But we made a decision very early on that we would, donate the remaining profits we had at the end of the period. So we always planned it was going to shut down. It turns out that setting up a nonprofit is actually not straightforward. It's expensive. It takes a lot of time. So it wouldn't have been practical to set up a nonprofit. And it would have been complicated. And it's interesting as well, Trond, when you're trying to recruit, I'll use the word recruit, even though it's clearly a pretty special limited time experience. When you're trying to build or recruit a team like that, it's interesting how that kind of slight nonprofit angle, motivates people. And it just kind of shows you the different ways in which people are motivated to get involved in different things. And
would you say that you have learned something fundamental by this experience that you can use back at Sedimount or back at Point5 Brewing? Or in an ulterior experience? I mean, what are you left with after this experience? Apart from having been able to pay your employees, which is great.
What am I left with?
Would you say that this actually is making you make different types of strategic decisions in your other business?
It's hard for me to pinpoint something, but I will say I would consider what we did to have been successful in that, we got it going, we made money, we made quite a bit of money, we can donate to charity. And I think just that success in itself is very valuable to everybody that was involved on the team, because it gives them, and me included, credibility going forward in our careers. And that's probably worth a lot more than, any money that was, that we could have made. So that would be my biggest takeaway from it. I think particularly, just for me personally, I think when big business slows down like Sandy Mount, that's pretty tough on morale, and having some small success like this with the hand sanitizer, I think was very big for me personally. And then for people who were involved as well, Dana, Adam, Anton, Gina, John and Barry. So
Ronan, what are your thoughts about COVID and business and post-COVID? I mean, we're not even post-COVID, but it's kind of a silly phrase actually right now. It's almost arrogant, I think, in the US to talk about post-COVID, but it's, because it's ongoing, right? But maybe in Europe, they can say post-COVID. What's going to be the fallout in the things that you care about now? So, beverage business, what's going to happen to, what kind of impact is COVID having on the beverage business?
So the impact is clear that it's driving demand towards the home, and it's driving demand towards e-commerce, which for non-alcoholic beer, since it's not regulated like alcoholic beer, I think is a big, advantage, because it's going to help drive sales in that category. So I think that, on premise is going to suffer. I'm kind of just stating the obvious, but it's in the short term going to result in, a tough environment for bars and for restaurants and for selling down that channel. Now, granted, in the beer industry, the vast majority of volume is actually going to homes. And so while, brewers have lost some money on going to bars, I think in some cases they've made up a portion, if not all, depending on the category of that volume. So I wouldn't say like beverage or beer in particular has been very badly hit, maybe compared to some other industries, like say just pure restaurants.
Right. If you're looking to the future, I mean, with a COVID lens or any other lens, we were talking about this a little kind of flippantly in the beginning, or I was just bringing in this like functional plus and this whole idea about flavor versus the more serious, I guess, health concern and lifestyle choice of going low sugar or no sugar. Are these the trends that are going to be lasting? If you look, stretch this out a decade, what do you see happening with beverages? Is it going to are we going to have this steady march towards a very significant market share, you think, of non-alcoholic drinks overall? Is it, what percentage does it deserve in a balanced society, if that's what we're moving towards, where people start thinking about their health? What is the balance? I mean, is the balance no beer, no alcoholic beer, or what do you foresee happen?
So I don't know what's going to happen. I think some of the things that probably won't happen will be, I don't think that beer is going to go away. And I think if anything, the core brands of like lager and ale, like the simple brands, not even crafty, I think those are products that have been around for centuries. Certainly ale has, lager's a bit more recent, but still like, over 100 years. So I think they have stood the test of time, and I would guess are going to continue to stand the test of time, as will, wine and spirits. At the margin, it's just really hard to tell exactly what's going to happen with product splits and what the trends are going to be. I can't predict those, but I'd be very surprised if the major categories like, beer, wine, spirits go away.
Transportation is an issue that you have been engaged with Sandy Mount, right? It's expensive to try, and supply chains have been questioned quite a bit under COVID. Do you, and if you could bring in another thing here, kind of distributed production, which is partly what you are enabling. Is there a world here where home brewing actually can become a real business? And I don't exactly know where I'm going with this, but if you think about how one foresees that 3D printing becomes really important potentially, because you can print things and you can kind of create, a lot of not just flavors. You can use all kinds of materials to create your own products. How does that work out in the food and beverage space?
Well, as you mentioned, transport is an issue because beverages, especially, beer, contain a lot of water. In fact, 95% for beer. And that makes them very heavy and expensive and have a big carbon footprint for bringing them to homes. And if you look at the e-commerce business in particular, like right now, so we sell Point5 online, and we sell a 12 pack. I think we sell it for $17.99. And then we charge $5.99 shipping. So what's that? 18 plus 6, $24 for a 12 pack, right? And we're charging $6 for shipping. Actually, shipping is like $14 for us. So we're just eating that cost within our price of the beer. And it depends where it goes. It could be higher, but it just shows you like such a large portion of the shipping cost for us doing e-commerce is like, it's such a large portion of the total price that people are paying. And so it's a big opportunity if there are ways to reduce that water that's being transported. And how do you do that? Well, concentrates do provide one avenue. Now, the thing is, how do you get, consumers to enjoy an experience with concentrates, and what does that look like? And I think, we have a solution that's launching soon for bars that will allow bars to serve draft beer from a concentrated keg. I would like to see us move towards a solution for homes that involves concentrate, so we can get down that shipping cost. I think we might be able to do it, within the next year for Point5. But, I wouldn't say that's all a solved problem, Trond. I think the experience is crucial for people at home. They need to have a good experience as well as a low carbon footprint experience.
Have you followed Bevy's move? The smart water cooler guys is a former student of mine. What do you think of their approach? The flavored drink dispenser, they are mostly in the office space right now, but I believe that they had prototypes for consumers as well. I mean, that is concentrates. They're basically building up a dispenser. Is that kind of is that model possible in the home? And
yeah, so
there were many that were critical to that concept. I mean, I talked to industry professionals who were saying, hey, this is ridiculous. We have tried this before. It'll never work. Yet, they're around. They have raised money. They're, a year and a half ago, they landed $35 million from Bessemer. I mean, they're investing. They're innovating in the field.
Yeah, so I know Sean, a little from MIT, and he's always been helpful to me with, questions and help. And I think that they definitely have the right long-term vision with, reducing the amount of water that's being shipped around. And they're doing that big style in businesses, as you said. With respect to homes, I think the potential is there. It's not an easy problem to solve, Tron, because I think the price point for people to put an appliance in their homes, it can't be too high. So can you sell somebody an appliance for, $200, $300 maybe? You're certainly not going to sell them $1,000 appliance, at least not to many people. So the price point becomes very important for getting into homes. And I think having something that's, technologically slick and gives a good experience while being at the right price point, that's kind of the key to unlocking that. And, I think Sean is well positioned for tackling that. And, hopefully Sandymount can make a contribution on the beer and non-alcoholic beer side.
So are you kind of splitting your time now between Sandymount and, your two startups essentially?
Well, right now, the hand sanitizer business, we saw the end coming of that about 3 weeks ago. And so we are currently in the phase of just distributing the funds out to charities right now. So there's not that much work for me on that, Trond. I forgot Chris.
But between Sandymount and Point5, they're sort of the same. They're sort of the same thing now. Yeah.
So right now, Point5 is under the umbrella of Sandymount. We may spin that out in the near future, but it's under the Sandymount umbrella, and I do split my time between those. If you think about it that way.
And who are the current clients, if you were to describe them, of Point5 Brewing, of this idea of non-alcoholic beer? You're selling to individuals, are you? Or are you selling to bars? What do you? Yeah,
we're just selling online, Trond. So it's individuals like you and me just ordering online and getting it delivered to their homes. We don't sell in bars at the moment. I think we may explore, going out to large chains, but I would have said even before COVID, which has made it even harder to hit traditional beer distribution lines, it's very challenging to get through traditional beer distribution with a product. There's a lot of layers. And so going e-commerce gives a lot of business freedom just to build that relationship with consumers and, directly deliver.
Yeah, I mean, the direct relationship with the consumer, it's the holy grail these days, right? There's a whole business of customer experience and a lot of marketing hype going into this idea that you are building these forever relationships with consumers. I mean, is that your experience, that your product becomes so important to these people? I mean, I guess they are innovators. They're buying a product that's unusual. They are first adopters, first movers. Do you feel like you have the kind of loyalty from these customers that you can think of them in a long term? Is that what happens with this kind of product, or is it not as easy as that?
I think it's too early for me to say what's possible and what works, because this is a new business line for me and I'm just learning about the e-commerce world. What I can say is that the business model doesn't work without loyalty. If you look at, the revenue you make from selling, a 12-pack of Point5, where we end up doing well is where we get loyal consumers that are ordering regularly. If we just have people buying a one-off, then, you just don't get a good return. So I don't know, maybe that's a good thing for the market because it incentivizes companies to do something that's good for loyalty.
Yeah. Well, fascinating stuff. I think this is a great discussion, Ronan. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Yeah, of course, Trond. It was a pleasure.
You have just listened to episode 2 of the Futurist podcast with host Trond Arne Undheim. The topic was the future of beverages. Our guest was Ronan McGovern, MIT alum with a PhD in mechanical engineering and currently the CEO at Sandy Mount Technologies and Point5 Brewing, an MIT spin-out he founded that serves brewers. My takeaway is that serial entrepreneurship takes trust, track record, and networks. I also have a newfound respect for the innovations happening in the beverage space, notably the uptick of non-alcoholic beer in Europe and now in the US, soon becoming a percentage of the market to reckon with. Turns out, a bit of tinkering as a kid can get an Irish kid from Dublin to MIT. That's also encouraging. Thanks for listening. If you liked the show, subscribe at futurized.co or in your preferred podcast player. Futurized, preparing you to deal with disruption.